Welcome back, fellow BBS nerds, to the CNet SysOp channel. As I mentioned in my first video, the goal of this channel is for you to follow along as I resurrect my Commodore 64 BBS that I ran in the late 80s on CNet 12.0. Couldn't find hardly any CNet 12.0 content out there on the internet, so I said, I'm going to make it. So I will definitely be getting into that detail later in later videos. If there's enough people who want to see this content or are interested, I'm guessing there's a couple dozen out there, and that's enough for me. I've spent a lot of hours learning, debugging CNET, learning how it works, and I want to share that information with you. So if you want to play around with it yourself or you want to resurrect your own BBS, um, heck, I even hope to someday uh, join with some other nerds that are smarter than me and actually host this thing on the web. I think that'd be super, super cool. I see other folks are doing that with their BBS from the 80s, and that is super, super cool. Uh, so enough of that. First video introduced the CNET diskette, all the contents there. Really quickly went into some of the tools. Go back to that video because I won't be repeating that stuff. But let's talk about booting up CNET and what it takes to actually uh, configure CNET for the first time. So I'm gonna pop over. I'm gonna be playing around in warp mode and getting it moving a bit faster. So this is a splash screen, and it's funny for me as I saw this splash screen. I thought the splash screen would have really triggered some serious memory for me when I first saw it after all these years, and it didn't. It was strange, but the other screens, the other subsequent screens definitely did, and certainly the splash screen to my own BBS flooded back memories for me, so very, very neat, but that's all future videos. But so let's talk a little bit about the configuration of the system. So you'll get to this screen when you start it. And this means, again, your system is not configured. So let's go into this. So this is when it's going to ask you to how you want to configure your BBS. Now, I mentioned on the previous video that the 1541 had a limitation of number of files in a drive. I think it's 148, something like that, but it's not a lot. When you think about each email is one file, each image is one file, each post on the subboard is one file, each file in the UD section, upload download section is one file. How anybody ran this on a 1541 or two, my hat's off to you. So I don't really know how I got this to work as a teenager, but I also had an SFD 1001, which was a 1 MB floppy, which I'm not even sure what the total number of files allowed on there was, but that must be how I did it because um, you can't do much with 140 files. So the reason why I'm mentioning that to you here is I would think about that as you do your setup. I would at least do a couple of disks. Like I'd probably say you can put a lot of the stuff on one disk and probably put your P files on another disk because P files can add a lot of stuff. That's your actual program files, as well as the G files, which I'll talk a little bit about that. But in this example, I'm just going to set everything up on the 8 drive. So system disk. These are all the sys files. These are all image files that what gets shown when you launch your BBS, the menus, all. If we come back in here to the actual CNET diskette, it's all of these files, the sys, the menus, the protos. These are the things that are on the system disk. It's not a lot of stuff there, but as you add more and more images and more P files that save things, you'll get more, more information on there. So that's your system disk. I'm going to do 8. Next one is the email disk. Email is files that begin with cm dot, and those are emails either to the sysop or to user. Those are what that email disk means. Etc disk stores all these, well, ECT files. ECT files are, this is feedback that is given to the sysop when a new user logs in, or these are messages, test messages to all the users. These are suggestions that are given. Error log is on here. So there's things like that. That's all the etc. It's good to know too because this threw me for a while that not only is it these files, but it's also the actual menus and directories when you configure your P files and your G files. P files, for example, when you added a game to CNet, you would go into your P files section and add that P file. And I'll show you how to do that in later videos, but that's how you do that. But the actual menus for those get stored on the etc disk. G files the same way. G files are actually like text files or sequential files in the Commodore world where you could add detail about information or how to instructions, computer help, things like that, and a lot of other things can be sequential files. But that's the Gmail, G files, and the P files, which is kind of confusing when you go through this. Like you think this is just the etc disk. It's just ECT files, but it's not. So, but now when you go to G files, you think the G files are also going to be where the G file directory files are stored, which point to all the G files. Nope, this is just the actual physical files behind those menus. Those menus are stored on whatever etc disk you're working on. And then you got G files, and then you got P files. P files, same thing, I mentioned P files. Those are all your program files. And consequently, we should probably talk really quickly about about the boot disk. And really quickly, all the P files are on here, but the only two that are necessary for booting is actual SU and CF. All the rest of these are part of the runtime itself. So if you were going to make P files be an extra, a different diskette or a different image, let's say on your drive 9, you want to grab all these P files, but the two you don't need on that other file is this. So you know what? Let's just do that really quick. Let's create a new D64, and I'm going to take all of these P files, and I'm going to drag them and move them over here to the left. And I'm going to, well, we'll wait to save that. And then I could take these out of here and get rid of all of these P files. Again, not these top two, not these top two. They're required on the boot disk. So that is what the boot disk can look like. And if you look at this right here, if you just open this file, you can tell right away, this is the program that we're running right now in Vice. It's asking you what directories and what and that sort of thing. So that's how you can set it up. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's how you set it up. But for our purposes, we're going to keep everything on one disk. But this is the time when you configure your system when you want to think about these options. So, but you can always go back and reconfigure it, and I'll show you how to do that too. You can just edit the bd.data file on your original configured disk. So P file disk, user disk, this is the other two files on here. Actually, I removed them, but there's a u.config file on there that stores all your user file. Also a u.alpha file. Not quite sure what the u.alpha file is, but the u.config user config files where all your users are set. And again, you want to consider future storage and things like that, how many users you're going to get, because you only have so much space. And so again, how anybody ran this on 11541, I'm amazed. So let's get through this. Now we press any key. This is where we're going to set up an identifier. I'm just going to call it CNet. And then you tell it what modem, and again, this was all like, wow, yeah, ATA and DTR and all these um, uh, uh, different modems. Credits have to do with games you can play and downloads. It's really arbitrary what you want to set for credit points for new users. Do you want to assign a prime time? This is where you can make prime time calling be a certain number of minutes. So I'm going to put no for that. And then what is my handle? And let's have something super complicated like password. Put my first and last name on there. Let's do 555, 555, 55, because this is the movies. Now it says insert your boot disk into drive 8, and that's the disk we booted on. So this has to write, and you can see right here, it's writing where I talked about BD data. This is where it's actually writing out BD data. Now it's saying insert all your disks in the system directories or all the different things you set up, and do this so it can write all the files. And now it's writing your user file, and now it's writing that alpha file. Again, I'm not exactly sure what the alpha file is. It looks like it's some kind of index. It's a one-for-one index with the user config, but I haven't drilled down incredibly deep into that file yet. But stats is a file that shows all like the call data, idle time, all these sorts of things for your data or for your BBS. Then it says insert your boot disk. I kept everything on the same drive, so it was super easy to do. But again, you want to come back and configure it. I'd set up a couple different drives, all that sort of thing. Now when it restarts, it will say, hey, go ahead and enter everything in your boot, because it loads all that boot information in memory. So let's say you had 2 drives and you said one's going to be my boot, but then I'm going to take my boot disk out and put my P file disk in. This is when you would do that, because you don't need the boot disk anymore unless you wrote your user files and everything to that same location. So you can play around with this. Just go delete that bd.data file, and you can go in there and change it all you want. So we're gonna let this start. While that's loading, well, actually, let's pop back in here really quick. I'm gonna load that image again, just so you can see what's happened here now. Now, if you look at the bottom of this disk, you can see it's added a handful of things. It's added, let me see here. One moment. Okay, let me clean this up here a little bit. So now, when we opened up that image again, you can see it's actually written a handful of things. It's written that BD data right here. That's that configuration file with all the 8s and 0s and everything like that. It's also added my 2-digit identifier. You can look down here. It's added that user config and user alpha. Super easy. For one, I forgot my password to my original BBS, so I was like, how am I ever going to figure out that? Well, if you open up u.config, you can see it's really, really interesting encryption. It's nothing. There's my handle, there's my password, my first name, last name, number, and then a bunch of what they call flags, which is all about your settings and everything. So super, super high security back in the Commodore 64 days. So here I'm thinking I'd have to like do a lot of funky stuff to try to get my password back. Nope, just open up that file and there it's sitting right there. So no chance of that password being remembered. So, okay, so now you come in here and you choose what day it is. And you can, by the way, not Y2K compliant, so let's live in the past for now, shall we? You can set all this up, hit yes. Now this is now where we get to the startup screen when you are waiting for a call. And I'll show you this really quick and walk through a couple things on it, and then we'll end this video, because the goal of this was to get here. So let it do its thing here and scan. I have a couple other drives attached to this in my Vice emulator, so you won't get that same thing. But it does, CNet does, if it detects drives, it does have to go out there and look and see how big the drives are. And so you got to have disks in there, or remove those devices from your emulator, or it'll lock up there. So now, as soon as this finishes, it's a little bit of work here. You can see it's clearing the line. And then this is your screen right here. And so this is what's called the bar screen. Shows all the statistics of the last call, the total system, percentages idle, really, really cool things in here. So, and something I didn't know until I looked at the instructions all these years later is that you can press the 1 to get here. You can press 2 to actually get, 1 is the clock. You get this nice big clock on your screen. 2, you get this bar, and then 3, you get this cool thing. Oops, ignore that. That's number 4. We'll talk about that in a second. Didn't mean to press that. So you can get to 3 and actually get to all the devices on your system. So super, super neat stuff. Really quick navigation, F4 and F5. F4 brings you to the left, F5 brings you to the right. So we can come in here and do all, and we'll go into all of this setup at the bar screen. We'll do all of that on the next video. Show you how to configure, show you how to log on to your website or log on to website, log on to your BBS and all the configurations there. So thanks for joining, thanks for sharing, and thanks for sharing your comments below. And yeah, hope to hear from you. Hope this is unlocking some memories. And we'll see you soon with the next video. See you, nerds.